Hello everybody, welcome to VB Music, where we encourage you to listen more. That means rather than looking people's hands playing on keyboards and all of that, you need to listen and to suss out what it is that you're hearing when you listen to another piano player or you listen to a recording with the piano player. What are the voicings? What makes the sound so nice? That's what you have to listen for, because music is a listening experience. It's not a thing about writing notes and looking at people's hands and thinking you're going to learn something that way. I never have met anyone whose piano playing got better from having watched videos of people's hands. Anyway, we do encourage you to listen more, and today we're going to talk about voicings called tenths. Now, tenths. First of all, we're going to talk about the definition, and then the application, all the good things about them, how you can use them in your playing, or I should say employ them to get the nice warm sound that you're looking for. And finally, problems and issues that might arise in certain situations. That there are different opinions among in trio playing, or whether or not pianists should play tenths and all that kind of thing. So we're going to get into that as well. So first, let's talk about the definition. The definition of a tenth, everybody should know, but just pro forma, we'll go over it one more time. It's basically an octave plus a third. So I'm going to play the C 2 octaves below middle C, and I'm going to go the octave and then plus a third more. Now that's a major third, so we have a major tenth. If I take the C and play instead of an E, I play an E flat, I have a minor tenth. Now, on occasion we add another tone to that in between those two. It could be the seventh, most of the time, some kind of a seventh or other, or eventually a sixth, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. First, let's talk about how we can apply the tenths. What the tenths essentially do is to free up the powerful middle range of the piano. The middle range of the piano is somewhere like from, give or take, from E below middle C, even up to here. Somewhere in there is the powerful mid-range, or eventually upper mid-range of the piano, which is where most of the melodic activity should be taking place. Your lines, what we call lines, which are really, a line is another name for a melody, right? And what tends to allow you to do is to harmonize anything that you might be playing in the right hand in that range. So for instance, now there's a lot of tenths involved in that. You probably picked up on. I'm going to go over them. I started with C. Now, depending what the chord progression is, sometimes you will play a tenth, for instance here. And let's say you move to E minor, and then you move to F. Perhaps you move to F sharp diminished, right? And then maybe you move to a C chord, which is next, and then you will play the G in the bass rather than the C in the bass. So then you'll have this kind of thing. So then I add a little fill there. This is a C blues. It's apparent to you by now. So I did There's different possibilities there. Sorry. Let's say that's the main application of your tenths. And what it also does, by coming up like this, in this particular case, up to here, it puts me right in the perfect mid-range to play the chords with the 5-note voicings. You know, the ones with the root in the 7th, the 3rd, the 5th, eventually the 9th, and all that. For instance, I came up to hit the C. I gave it to a C chord with a G in the bass, and this is measure now. This is measure 4. I should say measure 3. Yeah, and now I'm going in measure 4. I'm going to modulate, as it were. I'm going to play a 2/5 to go to the 4th degree F7 on measure 5. So I'm going to play G minor 7 to a C7. I might play a flat 9, and that'll take me to F7, which is the 5th measure of the blues in C. So by having done this, etc., 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 that brought me, when I arrived, the C chord with the G in the bass. When I arrived there, I'm right next to the area where I play my G minor 7, G, F, B flat, D, and then C7. I don't play a 10th. I could do, but it's convenient to just play C, E, a 3rd. So we're not always using 10ths. Sometimes we're using 3rds, especially if we come from this kind of a construct here, a 7th, root 7th, and I'm going a 4th up to the next chord, then it would be root 3rd. Very basic voicings now. What this all does is allow me to, in my line, I can play almost any kind of note, as long as if it's a note which is not directly a chord note, that it resolves to one within the context of the whole line. And it doesn't create anything but a very temporary dissonance. You know, if I would play, sorry. Right? So that doesn't matter, because I'm resolving to etc. I could go to F minor, E minor, E flat diminished, or E flat minor. What we've been doing now is simply what we call left hand harmonic support for what we're doing in the right hand. Of course, our tradition is a tradition of line playing. It's melodic, you can say it's melodic development within the harmonic framework. And this is, of course, what we used to be called bebop, which, I mean, is a term. But if you think about it, it's like the possibilities are many. And if your jazz language is sufficient enough, in other words, if you have enough elements in your language, not just scales up and down, but motifs, little melodic ideas, you know, licks they used to call them in the old days, or, you know, any other kind of little phrase which brings something to the music which is just not scales up and down, and it's certainly not pattern. So in the end, what I'm saying is that by playing tenths, and eventually within that context playing sometimes just roots and 7ths, or just roots and 3rds, depending where you are in the range of the piano, is something which gives you the advantage of harmonizing whatever you're doing in the right hand. And it gives you a lot of freedom in the right hand to play chromatic notes, notes which are not in the chord, as long as they're resolved within the development of the line. And you don't have to worry about altering when you play, for instance, chords which are so defined in close voicings, like a 13th, and then there's a flat 13th, there's a sharp 5, there's a flat 5, etc., etc. If you don't have to do those, if you just have to play the basic root, third, or 10th, and eventually a 7th in between, then you've got everything you need. You can play a sharp 5 in your line, you know. There's the sharp 5 and C7. It's all possible, and it all resonates because of the fact that we're playing the root, the third, or as the case may be, the 10th, and sometimes in the middle another note which is often the 7th or a 6th, and that's it. And the powerful mid-range of the piano, anywhere even up to here, you know. And when you stay in the middle, when your line comes back to somewhere in the middle, you can put in some chords as a fill, like so you're kind of making your own arrangement. You know, it's different than just playing, you know, all the way up here and being stuck up here. All this kind of thing all the time, because that's like limiting the wonderful sonorities of the piano to about half of the possibilities. Now that brings us to the next theme, basically, which is one more thing before we go there. The other aspect of the application of the tenths is in arranging a melody like a theme. Let's say, for instance, we would take Sir Charles Thompson and Illinois Jacquet's co-written composition, Robin's Nest, key of D flat, written for Robbins. I think this Leonard Robbins was a DJ back in the days in Chicago or something. Anyhow, it's spelled with a double B because it's not about the bird, it's about a guy named Robin. It was called Robin's Nest. Maybe that was what he called his program from his studio. Anyway, it starts out with a D flat major 7. And goes to A7. Now, I'm just giving you the basic chords to get in mind what's happening harmonically. We have two measures of D flat. I have to hit that note correctly for once. A7. Also, two measures. That's measures 1 through 4. Now, if I'm going to play this on the piano, how am I going to do that? I'm going to say. Let's see here. One of the modern nowadays piano players might be do something like that, but I wouldn't do that. I would do this. Alright, so let's look at the other points. The first one is the interval span. Not everybody has a hand which has a wide enough span to play a tense, and that's a legitimate and often mentioned situation and problems. But there's a solution to that. The solution is to roll them. For instance, if I go back to the original example in the C blues, that's what I did at first, but I can also do so I roll them. Roll them means right before the beat, because I'm playing them on beat 1 and beat 3. Right before the beat, I play the root note. So it's N1, N1, 2, N3, 4, N5, 6, N7, 8, N1, 4. Yeah, so. What happens is you've created the feeling of the harmony already just by doing. Or yeah, and that's enough, because what you're doing in the right hand is you're playing your lines, which is your melody. You indicate the harmonies with that line, and that's what we call a motif or a shout or something. Goes way back to the earlier times of the jazz language, and I've put that in. But for instance, if I would play something else, for instance, from Bach, let's say, for example, from the beginning again. From that, you can hear the harmony. Huh? One song. I have to remember what I just played. Let's try that again. Huh? So. You hear the harmonies. C7, F7, F sharp diminished, F sharp diminished 7. Two of the notes are the same as in F7, which is the C and the E flat. All three notes are the same: the A, the C, and the E flat. So the point being that you hear in your line, you hear the harmony. You're kind of indicating it, which is what we're supposed to do with melody. I mean, that's that whole idea. If we're working with melody and harmony, our melody should tell us about our harmony without us having to play full chords at all time. In fact, you've probably noticed in the example I gave previously with the Robin's Nest, I did. Sorry. I just played the melody almost without any chord, just right here. Because a melody which is played correctly, with the correct rhythm, which is clear and authoritative, then we don't need a chord. So a lot of times we're playing melodies without any chord. Okay, so getting back. etc., etc. So for those of you who, in fact, I can't make all the tenths myself either, because if you notice, the distances are different. For instance, from C to E, let's say the major tenth, from C to E is one distance, but from D flat to F is another distance. It's a greater distance. And I really can't hit that exactly. I hit it, but kind of, yeah. So you have those two distances or spans right there. And sometimes I myself have to go, you know. Plus the fact that rolling tenths is part of a style, you know. They used to do that in the old stride times. So it's a perfectly legitimate and not to be shied away from way to accompany yourself, you know, when you're improvising. So that's that point, interval span. So for those people who don't have that hand, which is able to hit in one go all the tenths or any of them, or just some of them, you have the option to roll. And you still get the benefit of hearing what the harmony essentially is, because you're playing a third and a root in most cases. Okay. Right, so the last point I'd like to mention is, which is written there, it's the piano and bass sync. That means the synchronization between the piano and the bass in terms of especially chord formulation and acoustics. In the 60s came up a philosophy, kind of an acoustic philosophy, that said the pianist should play in a situation where there's a trio involved, you know, rhythm section or just piano trio, that the pianist should play largely close chord voicings without any roots, and the area of roots in the lower part of the frequency spectrum is reserved for the bass. So what that did was it created kind of a new school of looking at how to play piano in the rhythm section, which led to, in my view, a kind of very cut and dried, almost lowest common denominator sound. Because, you know, there are only so many close chord voicings you can do. They're rather restricted in their range. And by relying heavily on that, it causes you melodically to forces you melodically to go into the upper part of the piano. For instance, if I play C7, let's say I was going to play the blues we just said before, before I did this. I should say. Let's say I wanted to play that, you know, with using what I call the most commonly applied voicings today. So that's what it would sound like. And if for the entire duration of whatever solo I would do, I would be confined to being up here, you know. Of course, always throwing in the sharp nines, which is very, of course, at the moment, very trendy. All right, so that's from the acoustic standpoint. That's, for me, is one kind of sound. It's not a legitimate sound, but it's one kind of sound. Now, if you think, in addition to that, the idea that the lower part of the frequency range is reserved for bass players, yeah, but is that really what bass players do? I mean, the bass players I've played with, some great ones, they play all over the place. They play, you know, D up here, G up here, you know, quite very high, you know. So they're moving all over the place. Sometimes they play also tenths, you know, you hear them do that. Why? Because the bass has a role, and its role is to move, to indicate harmony in tempo in a certain way that makes clear what the harmony is. And there's an intersection. There's an intersection of acoustics between what the bass does and what the piano does. So there are times when the bass line will cross into a range of where the piano is playing, and there are some times where the piano plays chords which involve roots which go into the area where a bass player is normally playing. But the bass player might not be playing the root at that particular time. He might be somewhere else in his line. If I play, for instance, this, okay, that's the first chord. So the bass player might well start with a C. But when I move to the E minor 7, flat 5, you see, the bass player might not be playing E there. He might be playing something else. It might create a temporary dissonance, but being an accomplished bass player and knowing how to indicate the harmonies, there'll always be places where the bass player will play notes which will cause a consonance, or if you will, a resolution of any dissonance which previously came. So consequently, you can hear the harmony. If you would extract the bass line and play it alone, let it play alone, or if a bass player is playing alone, a good bass player will play in such a way that you'll be able to tell what tune he's playing, if you know the tune, okay, let's say. Yeah. All right, so if you consider these two factors, is there any reason to tell somebody that that the piano sound should only be close voicings without any tense, without any roots? No, of course not. And if you listen to the great players of the past, you'll notice that. So this idea of this kind of, I call it the pristine, almost sterile type of sound, which has come up in the 60s, needs to be rethought, because first, it's limiting the range of what the piano can do in a rhythm section context, and there's no reason why that should be that way. And secondly, it's because the bass lines, they also go up high sometimes, and nobody's saying that they shouldn't or any of that. So consequently, let's keep that in mind, think about it, and yeah, that's about all I really want to say about that aspect. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. If you find that it proved useful, and if you'd like to support me in any way, you can do so by the links that appear in the text at the end of the video. In addition, you can download some practice files from my website. The link is also there with the text at the end of the video. And there you can find an exercise for tenths, for instance, all the tenths, major and minor, in every key. I advise you to go cautiously with that if you do decide to practice them, simply because it does require a certain amount of stretching, a certain amount of physical strength, whether you play a tenth, both notes of the tenth at the same time, or whether you roll it. It requires a certain physical strength to get used to. So don't go too gung-ho into it. Take your time and don't overdo it. In addition, there are a couple of examples of themes which you can harmonize using tenths, just to give you an idea how it can sound, or parts of a tune. In addition to that, you will see a link to my YouTube page, and as well other videos I have done, and there is a link also from my website to those other videos, where you can actually download the PDF files that are associated with that particular video. And have a good day, and take care, everybody.